Hello.
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 Too much of a delay. You got to be right on it. You got to be on it. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all.
Well,
lovely to
in
see
our
you.
defense, we were in tune this time.
Yeah.
So it's a start.
It's very good. I think.
Welcome to our weekly barbershop rehearsal.
Yeah. Well, another extraordinary week in the gender wars. I said on a recent post on my Substack, if you thought the UK was Turf Island, wait to see what happens after rape victims are told to reframe their trauma
by a man.
By a man who lied, who admitted that. I mean, let's just fill people in. Let's fill people in. Who knows most about the story? I mean, I guess we all know a lot about it, but who can dispassionately list off the facts of this story?
You do it, Graham.
Me? Oh God, I don't know. There's so much else going on that it's like, yeah. Well, anyway, Mridul Walha, I think is the person's name, is a trans-identified male who got into Edinburgh Rape Crisis, is CEO of Edinburgh Rape Crisis, and this was a scandal at the time, but as always, it was just kind of stepped on and no one reported on it. The Guardian and the left-wing press ignored it, as they often do, as they always do. But it turns out that Mridul doesn't have a GRC, I believe, or didn't have one when they applied for the job. That there's video of him admitting that he didn't have, that he didn't tell Edinburgh Rape Crisis that he was a man when he took the job. And the most recent shocking aspect of all this, beyond the fact that the guilty feminist accidentally did actual feminism by covering this, but the most extraordinary thing was an interview he did with this with the Vichy feminists on the Guilty Feminist, where he said that rape victims should learn to reframe their trauma, which I don't think there's really many ways you can spin that. It's an absolutely disgraceful thing to say. If I presume it means that if a woman has been raped and does not want Mridul in the room or near her, that she will be re-educated at Edinburgh Rape Crisis. I mean, is that a fair summation of everything that happened? Is there anything I've missed?
It does seem to be the case. I haven't watched the Guilty Feminist podcast, A-level results week this week, and GCSE. I haven't watched it, but I've seen the takes on Twitter, and that certainly does seem to be what has been said, which is the most extraordinary thing. I think as Aidan Cross has said here in the comments, reframe your trauma. That is one of the lowest anyone has sunk yet. I think that's true.
Yes.
It is. I mean, it is using traumatized women as a vehicle to again push a sort of, the trans activism, isn't it?
Yeah. And then of course he did sink lower, because then he called women bigots. He said even
bigots get raped.
Even bigots get raped. So you may need use of the Rape Crisis Center, but if you're a bigot, we're going to have to deal with that, And it's like, Jesus. Yeah.
It's extraordinary. And of course, the word bigot now means, people who don't believe that human beings have more than two sexes.
It's astonishing, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, one awful thing about all this is the level of confusion that it's creating in wider society. It really is going to be years cleaning this shit up.
It's astonishing. Yeah. Well, I was just talking to a friend about how the Overton window is no longer the Overton window. The idea of the Overton window is that everybody, the principle is that the majority of people want to put themselves in the center of any political issue. There are people who are far left, there are people who are far right. Most people want to put themselves in the center. So the idea is, if you are on the left and you want the center to shift towards you, you just make your demands more extreme. That shifts the center, right? But I think with this constant successes of the socially progressive side of things, a lot more people don't want to position themselves in the center because the center keeps losing. The left keeps winning, so to speak. So a lot more people want to position themselves as left of center. That's the default center, is to actually be left of center now for most people in terms of socially progressive causes. But if you're trying to position yourself as left of everyone else, and everyone else is trying to position themselves as left of everyone else, then everybody is running to the left, and it's a feedback loop. It's a purity spiral, of course, right?
Yeah.
And this is exactly what's happening when the basic acknowledgement of biological sex is openly called bigotry, because the left has shifted so far to the left that the center, which is just progressive, decent people who believe in science, are now considered so far to the right
yes,
that we're actual bigots, you know?
Yeah. It's extraordinary. What were you going to say, Helen?
Well, we said this about on the extra mess about Owen Jones, didn't we? That, you know, because he does identify himself as sort of lefter than anyone else, then he has to just, it just becomes more and more extreme for him. And then, you know, and then the Overton window does shift, although, you know, there are a million people that follow him. But like I pointed out, a lot of the stuff that he said last week, it really didn't get very much engagement. So he's trying to move the Overton window, but he's got a few viewers to that Overton window. I don't think it's, you know, quite as bad as every. I did want to make a point. I saw someone in the comments, I'm afraid it's gone now, so I can't name them, saying that reframing your trauma is actually it's a phrase used in therapy. So I did want to there's a tweet that Karen Gallia-Smith tweeted earlier, and I think it's worth reading out, where she said, "My heart is breaking for every woman and girl who has been denied the opportunity to reframe her trauma because she needs what some seem intent to deprive her of, an empathetic women-only space, somewhere that the barriers can go down so that she can build herself back up."
Beautiful.
So
Beautifully
beautifully put.
Yes, it's very well said. But so I wanted to say, so the reframe your trauma thing, it is a thing. But what is happening here is that some women and girls are being denied the opportunity to do so, you know, because that talking therapy would not be available to them because they only want to talk to a woman. Yeah,
I mean, it's the thing about it is it's another example of a profession that is not doing their job because of
but also
trans rights activism.
I'm sorry for jumping in here, Graham, but
don't worry.
Genuinely, right? This is a rape crisis centre. I mean, this is he sought this out. This job is absolutely sorted out as a male-born person to do this very, very specifically. You know, that's a red flag in itself, isn't it? That there are women there that do not want a male-born person to counsel them, but he's gone and sought out this job. Just like we've said many, many times, you know, the kind of male person who forces themselves into women's spaces and calls women bigots if they don't accept it. They're the last people that should be able to go into women's spaces. The last people.
That's absolutely right. And why would a male-born person want to be running a rape crisis center? And this is the second rape crisis center that this person's been in charge of. And by the way, when he lied about not being male or not being female, that was the first one. And he's I think that was a smaller one, and he's been upgraded to this bigger one. He's failing upwards. But just to be clear, but what is going on in your mind? It just seems so clear. We can speculate that it might be about, you know, the obsession with validation. There's an opportunity to validate oneself as really a woman by seeking out these female-only spaces and demanding access to them, even when they're there for rape victims. But the irony, of course, is if you really did have solidarity with women, and if you really were trying to live in harmony with women, you would acknowledge that your maleness makes you different from other women, and you would absolutely preclude you from being eligible to work at a rape crisis center. So you can see these people just putting themselves and their own needs above any woman, even women in the direst of crises. It's so despicable. And you see it in his behavior that he seems to be like taking the direction of this rape crisis center towards like, let's queer things up. Let's have like, you know, talks about how porn is great. And I'm sure there's going to be some like sex work is work kind of stuff too. You know, all this sort of queer academic horse shit. Instead of helping women.
It's not that he's ignoring the needs of women. He's specifically, I mean, I think it seems to me,
Hostile
sought
to
out
them.
these women. These women are to be used very specifically for the validation and the power. I mean, obviously, this is a power trip. It's a power trip to be able to walk in and say, this is a very, very, very sort of delicate female-centered space, but I'm coming in.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it's like, I know every time I mention Debbie's name, I get into trouble because there's so many people on my side who don't like Debbie. I like Debbie a lot, and I think Debbie has done some amazing work when it comes to his journalism for the Times and many other publications. But Debbie very early on said, it's very simple. We'd like to be. He was speaking about sport. And he says it's very simple. We don't enter women's sport. He says transitioning is a very big decision, right? If you're taking that decision, you're taking the decision not to compete against women in their sport because it's unfair and it's it's physically dangerous for the women. So there's certain aspects to being trans that I think should come with the whatever certificate you do or don't have, and one of them is, you shouldn't be a rape crisis center CEO.
Yeah.
You just like no sports and no
Yeah.
no being the head of a rape crisis center in Scotland.
And you're going to have to be very, if things like civic centers and public swimming pools and things, you'll have limited access to those because unless you're willing and able to use a men's changing facility,
Yes.
and that's just the way it's going to be,
I was talking to Rebecca today. Sorry, Helen, I'll just finish this thought off. I was talking to Rebecca today, and we were, who is the woman who the Labour Party put in a video calling her transphobic because she wore an adult human female T-shirt in the pub. We were just talking about how important it is that when this fight is won, that it's not like, oh yeah, you got this far, but you're not getting any further. Women have to reclaim the ground that has been lost. Too much ground has already been lost. So this isn't just a thing of, stopping the abuse of women, stopping the incursion into their spaces by males. It has to be reversed. It has to actually be reversed, and that's going to be a tough one, because so many people have invested so much in this ludicrous ideology.
Yeah, it's really going to, and the media is going to have to play a big role in bringing out debate, bringing out open discussion, bringing out sort of these truth and reconciliation type things that are going to have to happen. And the media has not stepped up at all yet, and that's really terrible. Well, what about all the women who work at Rape Crisis Scotland who this person I don't think passes all that well? It's not like they didn't know. Do you think these people were clamoring to affirm this person because it's it's again this sort of runaway train of of progressivism?
Who wants to be the person who speaks up and says no? Who wants to be that horrible person?
Well, no one, because I mean, did you see like the that index on censorship?
Oh, that was extraordinary.
It was extraordinary. So did you see this, Artie?
No,
so they had published an article by Kathleen Stock, but for balance, they also published an article by somebody called Dr. Phoenix something. I can't remember.
Blue glasses, pronouns in the bio.
Calls yourself Phoenix.
But this is but the article was very explicitly suggesting that Maya had engaged in hate speech, because hate speech is defined as if somebody who hears it it was the public order offences, or it was something like that, because if somebody who hears it believes that speech could incite someone to violence, then that is hate speech. It was the most extraordinary thing. And Maya, quite rightly, was extremely upset and angry about this. And they have given her the right of reply in another 3 months when their next magazine comes out. But it's an interesting thing, because obviously Index on Censorship shouldn't be censoring this speech, shouldn't be calling for somebody who believes this to be completely cancelled and not be published anywhere. However, to have an article in their own magazine really trying to silence women by calling their speech, and the speech was very mild, as in just saying biology matters, as hate speech. I think they've completely lost the plot on this one. But like so many other institutions, because they stepped in, now they seem to be having to atone.
They're panicking.
By saying, but it's hate speech, or this person can say in our pages that it's hate speech.
Because Index on Censorship did speak up in defense of biological sex, and that was very commendable. And of course, that meant there was a coordinated and massive attack launched at them. Same with the University of Essex. Did you see Julie Bindel this morning? Her piece in Unherd, because the University of Essex appears to be trying to backtrack. Remember, University of Essex famously commissioned. A barrister put together a report making it very clear that they had erred egregiously against oh my goodness, names killing me.
Don't worry, it was Rosa
Friedman.
And the other person, I can't remember who that was.
And another wonderful person who was wronged. And then, of course, the University of Essex issued an apology and a invitation for both of them to speak after their talks had been canceled by the trans-activist mob. And now they were facing so much pressure from their own staff and students that they're sort of trying to balance their apology by sopping to the activists, it looks like.
Joe Phoenix, thank you, everyone saying. No, well, this is something that I actually thought was so important. I wrote it down. There are so many institutions that are not doing their jobs at the moment because it's like they've played, again, I use the betting analogy, but they've placed a tower of chips on gender ideology, and gender ideology is not very stable, So, but also what it means is that if you place all your chips on this thing, you immediately lose the ability to do your job. Rape crisis centers don't do their job. Universities don't do their job. The NHS doesn't do its job. The BBC doesn't do its job. The Guardian doesn't do its job. All of these institutions are not doing their jobs at the moment. Why?
They're all privately saying the same thing. It's all preference falsification. They're all saying, we know this is probably silly, but we're scared of the mob. So it's like this vicious circle of everybody's scared of everybody else. I
just don't understand why they don't stand up to them. I mean, I know there's going to be a period of angry letters.
We do understand. I mean, we believe that they should, but you only have to look at J.K. Rowling to understand why people don't stand up to them. I mean, look at Vancouver Rape Relief. It's been targeted for the last decade. Its funding taken away because they refuse. 2 decades, because they refuse to bow down. They refuse, and because they refuse, the viciousness gets even worse because it is about power. It's about absolutely bringing this organization down and celebrating it. It's an absolute power trip. There's just no question. So so you can see that organizations might just want to get on with the other things that they do, and they think, it's worth it because it's just a few women.
Yeah, you know what? I think two things. It's because it's just women is a big part of it. As we saw the NHS document that Graham, you published, that was linked to by Rape Crisis Scotland for men who are victims of sexual assault.
Oh,
and it says, well, if you're a man and you're a victim of sexual assault, of course, you could, if you want to speak to a female counselor because you're uncomfortable being around a man, or perhaps you want to speak to a male counselor because you don't want to speak to a female about your crisis, your trauma, you have the choice. Of course, you can request whatever sex counselor you want. So when a man has been sexually assaulted, oh my goodness, we wouldn't dare impose a man or a woman on you. The sex of the person matters. But if a woman says that, it's like, shut up, you're a bigot. And you need re-education. That's ridiculous. But some organizations are standing up. I was really relieved to see. My friend is in university right now at the University of Buckingham, which is a very small, I think, somewhat conservative university. And he's doing a sex and gender in law class as part of his law degree. And it's very affirmative that sex and gender are two different things. The text is just like a long preamble that this is what sex is. It's biological. There's two. This is what gender is. It's social stuff. It's very, very different. And we're going to move forward with that firm establishment. And I was very, very impressed to see that.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've often imagined, I mean, it's almost like a magic trick they've pulled off, that for the last 5 years, they've avoided getting into a TV studio with a woman who could challenge them, or anyone who can challenge them. They've done this so well that the times that it has happened have been really justly celebrated because they're so funny. Like my favorite one was I think she was with the Greens. Let me check that. But she was talking to John McAlpine, and she said, biological sex is not binary. And it was just the most amazing. It was the most amazing thing of seeing someone actually say that in front of a camera. You know,
but it's because people have seen it written down so much, and on Twitter, you know, that you see it written down, and you can say it, and lots of people will join in tweeting. That ridiculous was a Nature article from about 4 years ago that the woman who wrote it came back and said, no, of course there are two sexes. That's not what I meant. But so on Twitter, you can get away with it. But on TV, if you say it and somebody challenges you, then I can only imagine that you're just going to go, well, it isn't intersex people. I mean, that's what they'll say. But even then, but that muddies the water, doesn't it? Because, you know, most people will then say, okay, yes, unless you've fully understood the fact that actually talking about trans people has nothing to do with whether intersex people exist or not, because they're completely different things. Because, you know, it's that Mott and Bailey, isn't it? It's that biological sex doesn't really exist. But actually, sex and gender are different. So what does it matter anyway? It's just throwing arguments at it in order to muddy the waters so that people will just accept what you're saying. Because
none of it ever makes any sense.
I need to educate myself.
And
there's no difference between sex and, I mean, if like biological sex is a spectrum, and you then why do you need genital reassignment surgery in the first place? Why do you need all this stuff to look like one sex and not the other, if there's no such thing as one sex and the other? None of it makes any sense, you know. It was never.
Did you see? I saw a very, very disturbing tweet. I think we should link to it in the comments after this. It was somebody who had found two sort of gender affirming surgeons. They were advertising in, I think, America, advertising gender nullification surgery, saying they were suitable was the word, for people who identify as non-binary. Basically, completely getting rid of external genitalia, completely.
Yeah.
I mean, and when it said sort of sewing up the labia, it was just really very evocative of FGM. It was the most horrible thing, and removing the penis, etc., and just leaving it. And it said, you know, completely smooth and suitable for those identifying as non-binary. And this is now being advertised, and it was very, very shocking to see this written down. I felt, because this is where they're sort of pushing it, isn't it? I'm not sure how many takers they will get, to be fair, because most people who identify as non-binary, they still really like sex because they know what sex they are. That's all they've done is dye their hair blue.
Yeah.
Owen
J. Hercombe is my favorite example of that.
Did you see that tweet? That was excellent. When he was saying, you need to when we tell you to go and educate yourself on trans lives. Because I replied saying, well, the problem that you've got is that we did educate ourselves on trans lives.
That's it.
And this is where we are.
Yeah, exactly. It was like the more exposure to gay people had, the more welcome they were of gay rights. But the more exposure to trans people you have, the more you're like, these aren't women, you know, trans women, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's an interesting. I mean, I do again, and again, I'll get into trouble for this, but like, I do think there are. I see them every day on Twitter fighting back against this stuff. You know, a lot of trans people, you know, even AGP, which we often talk about. Even AGP, as you know, Debbie admits to being AGP. But they are reality based, and they despise this movement. They despise it. They know how dangerous it is, you know, to lie to people, to expect people to carry a lie throughout their life, you know, it's not just harmful to the people who are having to play along with the lie, it's harmful to the person themselves. It seems like a shortcut to mental illness, to have this kind of, and we're going to see so many more moments like the Wee Spa, like the Star Wars guy. We're going to see all these flashpoints because, and obviously the best one, which was I think Yes Ma or It's Ma'am, that guy who turned out to be an armed robber.
Right. Yeah.
But those kind of things are going to happen because if you're on Twitter, you believe in this lie. But if you're not, you don't. It's that simple. Twitter has been like a mass anti-vaccine service that basically removes our ability to reject silly ideas. I think Twitter has just been these kind of thought-terminating cliches that have spread on Twitter because trans women are women. Genital whatever, these what is it they call genital discrimination or something?
Genital fetishists.
Gay people are genital fetishists, stuff like that. This is all stuff that there's no thought behind it. There's just, as you say, Helen, it's just been repeated by other people. And it's just a kind of a mental flu that people have.
A case in point, I saw earlier somebody retweeted Maggie Chapman, MSP. So she's a Scottish Greens MSP for North East Scotland.
That's the one. I think that's Maggie.
And the tweet is simply trans women are women, trans men are men. No. Non-binary people are non-binary. Trans rights are human rights. It's meaningless, isn't it? Because I've asked her. I've said, but can you answer about the reality of your hashtags? The reality is, do you actually believe that male-born people, etc., with a penis, should be allowed to undress in communal changing rooms with women and girls? But obviously, there's never going to be an answer to that from her because it doesn't need to be, because this has had over the 1,000 likes now, just these hashtags. What do non-binary people are non-binary? It's an insane thing to say. It's completely meaningless. And she's written it down on purpose. She typed it out.
That's the same person who did the interview I was just talking about. Like, imagine going on television and saying out loud that there's more than two sexes, that sex isn't binary. It's just insane. Listen, Susan from ForWomen Scotland is with us, so I'm going to bring her in without further ado, if you don't mind. Almost right on time. Hi, Susan. How are you doing?
Hello. Well, thank you.
Good.
You all. Yes, you too.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. Like, ForWomen have been brilliant in their reaction to the Edinburgh to the scandal at Edinburgh Rape Crisis. How do you read how women are responding to this? Is it just another bit of craziness, or are people genuinely angry?
I think this has been brewing for a while, and I think people are angry. And women have been trying to have a conversation with the people at Rape Crisis Scotland and Edinburgh Rape Crisis and so on for quite a long time about this and about how they're framing these definitions. It's really interesting. I heard you before I came on. We met Maggie Chapman. I don't know if you're aware, but Maggie Chapman was the chief operating officer of Edinburgh Rape Crisis until she got elected as an MSP. So so these issues are really, I know when Andy Whiteman wrote his blog about how queer theory's taken over the Green Party, but a lot of these politicians, because Mridul is a Green Party member as well, but he tried to be a candidate for the SNP actually, but failed to do that. I believe that there's another Green Party candidate who is also very senior within gender. So there's a deep connection there.
It's like the Masons sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
I mean, that it's bad enough when you've got a political party that's thoroughly sold on the idea that boundaries are prejudice and discrimination, and how dare you judge people by anything other than self-identification. But it's quite another when it got into the women's sector to that degree. and to the degree that a lot of people, because what we hear from people is most people in the women's sector who were there at the start and who built these centres and are part of the counselling team, they're not thinking like this, and a lot of them find this horrifying. But there is this new breed of people, younger people, who perhaps didn't come at it from the same end of activism that they did, who really seem to be buying into the gender theory rather than the practicalities of what they're supposed to be doing. And they do see, like as we saw, that Mridul said, therapy is political. Well,
that was the second most extraordinary statement he said. I couldn't believe that one. That was horrifying to hear.
Yeah.
Therapy is political. What the fuck are you talking about? Sorry, excuse my language, Susan.
No, I think that was a pretty general reaction, and the anger was because they've responded by saying there's a campaign of misinformation. They've responded by saying they're being attacked online, that these nasty, horrible people are bullying them. That was a response to a podcast that had been put out there that the CEO of Edinburgh Rape Crisis was quite happy to publicly say all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was put out there by Mridul and by the other people on Guilty Feminist, and they were all very pleased with themselves. And women and survivors heard that and were horrified. That was what happened. It wasn't part of some nasty coordinated campaign, and it just reinforced everything that some of these survivors have felt for a very, very long time. And then, because there was two things came together on Monday, there was that and the response to that, and there was also a thread that our sister organisation, Women Scotland, who are brilliant. They've done so much work for about access, about how women access services and whether they self-exclude. And they've looked at things like they did a huge report, a massive report on women self-excluding, and they sent it to Rape Crisis Scotland and said, can you look at this, please, because this is what the evidence we've collected. And you go back to the threads that their director wrote about what had happened, and Rape Crisis Scotland had tried to ignore the issue, tried to obfuscate. They said, no, all our workers in our centres are women. All our spaces, we have women-only spaces.
Yes.
And yet we know that they have a centre led by somebody who is not female. So they went back and said, we're asking about females as defined in women as defined in law. And because they wouldn't answer, they went to the centres direct. And this is the campaign of misinformation, according to Rape Crisis. It's not a campaign of misinformation. It is quoting their own words back at them and their own policies back at them.
Yes. It's so true, isn't it? It's like...
I think... Sorry, Graham. I mean, I think what happens here is that, these organisations, and I think they see that the prevailing narrative is trans women are women and you have to say it. And they are actually really quite shocked that people can't, that women are prepared to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. And it's not all coordinated. It's not that there's been a big meeting where women have said, right, let's go and attack and bully this centre. It's people reacting to what they heard.
Yeah,
this was said. It's exactly as you said, Susan. They said this out loud, and then they're expecting women to just accept it, swallow it quietly. But women have said, no, we're not going to. And because of this, it's like, oh, look at us, the victims. I mean, I saw what Twitter has done. It says in my sidebar anyway, trending Ask Rape Crisis Scotland, but Twitter has actually added something beneath it to say Rape Crisis Scotland said that its helpline is open to everyone, including women, trans and non-binary people, men and boys affected by sexual violence.
That's not what the debate is about.
No. And
this has been manipulated now. Another politician, Mari Hunter, who is a Glasgow councillor, but very, very close to Nicola Sturgeon, and she often she could lead masterclasses in political spin. except she's not that good at it because it just comes across as downright lying half the time. And she's come on there and gone, there's awful people, basically. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. She's not quite said that, but I think that's what she meant. They're trying to stop trans people accessing services. Nobody said that. And we wrote a very long blog on it all. And one of the points was, we want everybody who is a victim of abuse to be able to access a service that is tailored to them. And for women, that will mean that some women will want female-only services. That's all. We're not saying don't give counselling to trans women, don't give counselling to boys. That would be abhorrent. But that is how they've decided to reframe it now. They're saying trans women shouldn't be able to access services. No, we're not saying that. And if they can be provided within that structure, because rape crisis do give advice to people other than, to men and boys and everyone else, that's fine if they can provide it.
Absolutely. Vancouver Rape Relief, same thing. They provide service. If you are a trans woman, if you're male, trans-identified male who has experienced sexual assault, they'll provide you with counseling. They'll provide you with all the help in the world. They're not going to let you sleep there overnight with the women, and they're not going to let you be in like a certain private counseling group sessions with females who can't be around males, but they're going to do everything they can to accommodate you and refer you to places where you can get further help. That's never been a question. And of course, right now, the NHS is saying that the same thing that we want for women to have, men can have it. Men can have a counsellor of the sex of their choice, and nobody's batting an eyelid at that.
And women can't. Yeah, it's the most extraordinary thing.
That is the misinformation, isn't it? That's a lie that people are saying this, because people are not saying this. And I see it again and again when people say, you're trying to prevent, or they're trying to prevent trans people from using public toilets. Come on, or playing sport. Come on, nobody's doing that. It's just, it's like, and the fact that you've had to lie about it shows that that what you're asking for isn't quite.
That's a very good point.
What you believe.
That's a very good point. I do think that's true. Mary Hunter can only win inverted commas arguments if she actually lies about the nature of the arguments. Yeah. It's very easy to be on the right side of something that actually isn't happening.
It's also true that trans-identified males are a pretty small amount of the population still, obviously growing very, very quickly, but still there aren't very many of them. So I can imagine outsiders might be thinking, what's the big deal? This is still just a small amount of people. But what they don't fail to recognize is it just takes one. There was who's that wonderful lesbian who rides her motorcycle around the United States? What is her name?
Skylar.
Yeah. She was talking about how she was a victim of sexual assault, and she went to a rape crisis center, and she said if a man had opened that door, she would have ended her life right then and there. She couldn't cope with it. So that it's just so important. But another thing we need to recognize is that these spaces for females only and for females in trauma, they're like magnets for trans-identifying males. There's such a disproportionate amount of men trying to gain access to these spaces, trying to invade them. Some of it's sexual paraphilia around rape, quite unfortunately, Some of it is just like Helen points out, a need to dominate and show women that men can enter their spaces. Some of it is just an obsession with validation of true womanhood. And the true test of true womanhood is to go into these spaces that are 100% for women only. So there's just such a massive disproportionate amount of these trans-identified males constantly banging on women's private spaces, especially rape crisis centers. So it's not just a small number of people. It's a constant problem.
Some of it is deliberate activism as well. This is publicity, isn't it? This is activism. This is absolutely to raise the issue, and to bring it out so that people will condemn women by saying exactly as you said, Susan. They will condemn women by saying, look at these awful women trying to prevent people from accessing services. It's deliberate.
Yeah,
and the issue, and you're right. There are. The argument often comes back, why are you worried it's not going to happen? There are only a very few people. But the issue that I think, and especially putting somebody who is legally and biologically male in charge of a centre, is once you have done that, you have removed the argument for a single sex space. You have said that this place is no longer a single sex space, that it's a mixed sex space, that people who are male can be on your staff and they can be in these spaces. And once you've let one person do it, even if that is the best and most lovely and wonderful person in the world, because we all know and love our men, but it's a bit of a not my Nigel argument, that my Nigel gets to be in charge of this centre. And we can somehow stop all the other Nigels who might not be as nice coming in. But you can't do that.
Yeah.
Well, no, but they've also said, but what it also says, isn't it, is that women do not need the single sex spaces that they believe that they do need. We can say, no, actually, you don't need it. You don't need it.
Because look at this person. Yes. This person has been the CEO of Edinburgh Rape Crisis. It's true. It's the same reason Laurel Hubbard threw the Olympics. It's just like, oh, look, I dropped the weights. Everything's fine. Women can still have their sports. No, they can't. If a single man is in female sports. And again, there's that double standard again, because you'll notice that GC people didn't complain at all about Quinn being on the Canadian football team. So that's the idea,
well, they celebrated Quinn being on the
celebrated because Quinn is not a cheat. Yeah, Quinn is not a cheat and was playing in her biological sports according to her sex class. But so the idea that there's any kind of trans exclusion going on to do with sports or rape crisis centres is just insane. It doesn't work. The only thing we have a problem with is taking the words trans women are women as a literal truth.
Yeah.
It cannot be taken as a literal truth. It's too deranging. It turns everything upside down, and it makes these privileged women in the bloody Guilty Feminist podcast, they probably won't have need of these services, so they don't really know what those women need, They
were awful. And the way they spoke about checking your privilege and accepting that a trans woman on a bus at 1 a.m. is going to be more, and I thought, have you never taken a night bus?
Yeah.
And I think this whole check your privilege thing is because I am terribly probably terribly privileged in certain ways, but okay, and I was a bit of a liberal feminist, and I thought, well, what are the people in Scotland who are the most disadvantaged as a group, really, of women? We've got a huge socioeconomic divide. So what are the kind of working class women who are likely to have issues around drugs or prison or prostitute? What are their issues, and what are their needs when they seek help? And it was their needs that were being completely overlooked.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
And I thought, that is not fair. That is not checking your privilege to say to these women, very vulnerable women, that some middle class male in Edinburgh University who happens to like wearing skirts on the weekend is more oppressed than they are. But this is what that's obviously a bit of
but it's another silencing tactic, isn't it? We've seen it so much that it's all of this. Oh, look, it's the Mumsnet crowd, it's the middle class mothers. Look, they're all making a fuss when none of these issues will affect them. But it's silencing. It's political activism is about not just you. It's not about your needs. It's about what you think the whole group of across society needs.
It's luxury beliefs, really. These very suburban men and women who are consider themselves trans activists and very entitled and very educated, lecturing everybody else to check their privilege. To me, I almost want to fall out of my chair. Like, do you hear yourselves right now? The utter pamperedness of your position. I think back to Vancouver Rape Relief. I know that's not the same thing, but I've heard that a sizable majority or a significant number of the women who use the services of Vancouver Rape Relief are Indigenous women in Canada. These are First Nations women who are not even existing in the same, they're living on reservations, they're living in a completely different culture from white, Western, educated, really bourgeois, silly, suburban, all this this queer theory stuff, and to be telling these women they have to access a rape crisis shelter, they have to suddenly get up to speed on queer theory. You know, some of these women are going to come to the shelter and be like, I have no idea about, you know, trans activist movement. You know, they've been on a reservation. You know, it's shocking. And working class women, I'm sure in Scotland, like they don't have time for this. You know, you know.
And that was an interesting point about. I think it was there was an interesting point on Mumsnet actually. I think because I don't often look at Mumsnet, but I thought I wonder what they're saying, because it's sometimes quite interesting to dip in and have a look. And there was a comment from somebody about how Mridul started working with Shakti, and Shakti are working with very, very marginalised communities. You know, women. The white population in Scotland is 98%. So, when you're talking about women from a BAME or ethnic background who need access to these services, you know, a lot of them are going to be in an extremely vulnerable position. And they said that, you know, in a way, these aren't women who have the power to say no. And that's even more scary, that these are women who need to take help where they can get it. And so that's probably another reason why it's quite important when, you know, but for a bigger range of survivors and women who need services to be able to say, no, this isn't good. And it doesn't matter what you think your motivations were. You have put vulnerable women in a very difficult position. And women who have come from a culture where they can't be in a mixed sex group are, you know, they're going to be dissuaded from accessing these services more than most.
Well, as you say,
yes, that's the tragedy. Is there's an invisible self-exclusion. There's going to be some people too afraid to access these services at all, and that's horrible.
That's what this fight is so full of. I've said it. I know you've heard me say it many times, but the dog that didn't bark. You know, it's the idea that because people aren't vocally complaining or whatever, that there's no problem. You know, but there's a lot of women who are too scared to argue against this stuff because of men like, you know.
And we don't want that. We don't want them not to access the services, and that was why women and girls in Scotland were really trying to bottom out who was offering the services, because. And we've had quite long discussions with them about, you know, don't say. I think they worry in case people think they can't access services, and I really understand that. And so that was actually behind them going out and trying to contact these providers. It wasn't to be able to say, look at them, they don't let people in. They made people talk to men or whatever. They wanted to say, no, you're going to be all right. You're going to be able to ask for female.
Yes.
And that was the motivation behind it. So for them then to be attacked for that. And then, of course, what they revealed, that in some of these conversations, the directors at the local centres were saying, we do offer female-only services, but we're frightened to say that publicly because we'll get attacked by the people at the top of Rape Crisis or the government.
Oh, that's outrageous, isn't it? Wow. That is very, very, very poor. I mean, imagine that this is where we are, that people are afraid to say, yes, we do offer women-only services for the most vulnerable women in society. The people are actually afraid to say this out loud because people will attack them for it. You know, I think just for a moment, let's let that sink in. People will attack them for offering women-only services to the most vulnerable set of women in society.
Susan, you've been with for Women Scotland for how long now? A few years?
Since it started in the summer of 2018.
Right. So you've been. So what do you think? Do you think that this feels like from scanning Twitter, this feels like a bit of a sea change to me? I've seen people who don't speak up a lot talking about this. A lot of men for once, which is a good thing to see, because men are so frightened to talk about this subject. What do you think, from your vantage point? Do you think it might shift the needle?
I would like to think so. The problem we have in Scotland is that we have a First Minister who seems utterly wedded to this, and I don't know why. I don't know where it's come from. She won't have a conversation about it, so she won't defend the principles. And the other thing, of course, about Scotland, the issue we have in Scotland is that it's a very small community, especially in the political and the policy set up and with all the funded groups. It's a really, really small community, and they all know each other, and they've all fed into each other for years and years and years. So it's very hard then, once they've gone down a certain path. I think it's much harder than it probably is in the rest of the UK to pull that back, because although there were far more people actually in Scotland initially speaking up, I mean, we probably had a lot more rebellious MSPs than were seen in the House of Commons. There was still probably more of a diverse views that weren't being spoken about, and now that's been permitted. Maybe that's coming through a bit more in the wider UK. But I think the issue with Scotland is the interconnectivity and the fact that these groups are all funded by government, that they all know each other, that they all sit on each other's boards, that they all probably go to the same parties and marry each other.
Yes, I've heard about the scene in Scotland amongst politicians. It's like suburban life in the 70s in a kind of in California. It's very weird what's going on.
It's one big key party.
It's one big key party. Yeah. But we can't talk about it for various reasons. Yeah, well, sorry. I was gonna finish, Susan, by asking: is there something? Right. First of all, is there anything that if you are looking for help, you can do to ensure that you will go to a centre that will give you a female? Is there an online resource that we can put in the comments that can help people find these places?
Well, I would say, as I say, Women and Girls in Scotland are trying to do the spade work on this at the moment. So that's probably a good starting point, because they are actually contacting all of the centres to ask them. So I think that, and they've got that thread that's live at the moment. And they have said that if women need support in accessing services and need somebody to be a representative and contact them and say, look, can you offer this, that they will do that. So I think that they are probably a really good first port of call for resources, because otherwise I think it's almost dependent on ringing the centre and ensuring you get the right person, and I think when you're in a vulnerable position, that's going to be difficult, because we know there are people at these centres who will be absolutely sympathetic and want to help, but we also know there are other people who will be less so. So that's obviously not a risk women want to take. So I think just having someone who will maybe make that contact for you so that you don't feel you're being judged is probably quite a good way to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll put the link for Women and Girls in the comments. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything? Oh, you've got a big. You've had a huge recent success, which is fantastic. You made your crowdfunder 190,000, which is amazing. To do what again?
For appealing the judgment on the Gender Representation on Public Boards Act. So that was way back 2018, and it was snuck through a redefinition of women at the last minute. Yeah, which it's supposed to be to enable public boards to be 50-50 male-female, but then they said women was anybody who used pronouns and I know. It's nonsense definition, and we felt that was. It also excluded women who didn't identify as women. So it was really creating a whole new category that isn't a category.
Right.
We felt the judgment there is a lot that is quite bizarre in the original judgment, so we're appealing that, and our lawyers think we've got a good case, so we've just got to do that. Hope for the best, but at least we now know that we can take it that stage. We've also got because the Scottish Parliament is back at the beginning of September, so we've got a demo on the 2nd of September, which coincides with First Minister's questions, because we think that they are going to announce GRA reform and self-identity as part of the programme for government, so that'll be out that week. So we think it's quite important that people just turn up then and just let them know that this is not, it wasn't in their manifesto. It's not something that people voted for. It may be, I suspect it will be something that the Greens will be pushing for as part of any deal that they do. And they're meant to be doing this deal at the moment. So we have every reason to expect this has been announced. So we just thought we need to get in there as well and show that we're not happy about that either.
Well,
those are actually big things.
I think that ForWomen Scotland has been kind of inspirational in all this. You've been really just doing some amazing work. So best of luck with the demo. I might see you in a couple of weeks. I'll be up for Marion's hearing. So I might meet you then, hope to. And in the meantime, keep it up and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. That was excellent.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Brilliant. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
I was just thinking as we were talking to Susan there that if the Guilty Feminist podcast could go back in time and delete that section, they'd do it. They'd do it, wouldn't they? They would do it.
I wonder.
Because
because they like clicks. People want people. Now people have heard of the Guilty Feminist podcast. They don't. I can't imagine that they particularly care. They just want. They just want people to come along. Maybe. A lot of this is likes and clicks, isn't it? So much of it, because there is a lot of narcissism and look at me and look who I am, and people. This is a huge part of the problem. In fact, I think.
Yeah, it's funny how Twitter is feeling so much of this, because to go back to something you were saying earlier on, Graham and Helen, about how Twitter is fueling all this trans women or women nonsense. This partly because no one can speak against it. You get kicked off of Twitter if you say no. I don't believe your biological sex. It's just so frustrating that I can't say half the things I want to say because they all violate the rules. And even if I'm not sure, I have to just refrain from saying it, because if you're not sure, you have to err on the side of caution, because those sharks are constantly policing you.
I think one of the greatest things that Twitter did for the other side was to prevent women from calling trans women men.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
If you use the word men, then it completely changes the conversation. People immediately have a very, very different picture in their head of what you're talking about. But Twitter prevented this from happening. And
isn't that ironic that using the word man instead of woman has a shockingly different picture, because we all intuit the massive difference between men and women.
Yeah, because we know.
But even they do too. That's why they freak out when you use the wrong one, because it's all about, there's no such thing between men and women. But if you say one instead of the other, you're killing us. Like, again, another one of these things that doesn't line up. Yeah. Sorry, no, I was actually going to rumble. That would be a bad ending to the show. Was there anything else? Is there anything else that happened that we want to quickly talk about before we move on, or before we say goodbye to everyone? What else has been happening? Oh yeah. There's a guy who's been kind of coming onto my website and taking screen grabs of conversations, and he's a comedian, and he's kind of going around to various blue ticks, and he's saying kind of, is there any way you could do something about Graham Linehan on Substack? He thinks he's such a hero for the cause of white suburban guys who cross-dress, But the interesting thing is he took a screenshot of a conversation that was actually something that was said by a trans person, Sarah Brown, about Julie Bindel.
and it was being quoted back. And I deleted the comment because I thought, oh, this does look a bit kind of transphobic. It wasn't even my friend speaking. It was Sarah Brown.
Oh, that's excellent.
So I wonder if he'll condemn Sarah Brown. I wonder if he'll be contacting his employers.
I'm going to go out on a limb and guess no. I've got one thing to say. Dennis, who is here in the comments, Dennis Kavanagh. Yes, I saw that he is complaining to the BBC. Made it public because the BBC has adopted an unlawful and discriminatory definition of the term homosexual in their house style guide. I think if Dennis is happy for us to link to this tweet in the comment, I think it's well worth having a look. And he's suggesting that if anyone else wants to complain, then he's put a link in where you can do so.
Yes, and again, if they fob you off with something, the trick I hear is to write another complaint, but add elements to it. Don't just write the same complaint over and over. Add elements to it and force them to engage with the issue. I was thinking, and this is something I haven't really thought through yet, but I saw recently, I'll try and find the tweet so we can link to it, but I saw recently that feminists have been sending postcards. I think Canadian feminists have been doing it. Artie, do you know of this? They've been sending postcards to people, in like a postcard campaign, almost like the sticker campaign with adult human.
I need to look into that. We're in the middle of a brutal heat wave, so everybody's like slow as a sloth in Canada right now. I haven't been keeping up because it's like I'm basically melting.
I'm wondering whether we do a similar campaign to the BBC. And even to the Guardian, and just kind of show them how angry and upset women are because of all this stuff.
I think many of us there are.
Yeah, and how many people there are. And I'd really like to make that hashtag.
It's a good idea because everyone can read it. I was thinking in lockdown that we could have the same sort of thing to MPs and to Boris Johnson. Just asking like all sorts of questions, asking questions, but they, everyone can see them. So say asking, should bail-bond people be allowed to, and saying, can we get proper clarification on the Equality Act, etc. That sort of thing. But in lockdown, you couldn't really send postcards because it would have been a bit wrong to do that. But coming out of lockdown, I think we are all able to now go to the post box and things. I think it's a great idea, a coordinated postcard campaign.
And I also think I think that something that we might be able to kind of rally around is the simple phrase, hold the debate. Because part of the reason this stuff is so painful and so hurtful and so awful is because mainstream publications like The Guardian, mainstream institutions like the BBC refuse to hold the debate. They pretend there is no debate, and there very much is. So I think writing one aspect of the debate onto a postcard and sending it to the BBC might be a thing to do. So anyway, I guess that's it for this week. What a crazy week. I personally think something's happening because I think people might have felt we were exaggerating with all our tales of men in rape crisis centres and so on. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe now that it's being played out, I don't know. I'm hoping that this is the one that will make. I don't think this debate is characterised by the other side trying to put a lid on everything. Always trying to put a lid and say no, this isn't happening. This isn't happening. But it is happening, and people are seeing it more and more. I think, as you're saying, Graham. The men in women's prisons thing has really happened. The Wee Spa thing happened. People are seeing it. You can't really. It's like it's not going back in the box.
Yeah. And this isn't just a very, very tiny number of people that we're going to make some exceptions for out of compassion. This is a large phenomenon now that has exploded. It's not just two people. It's like millions of people, and it's causing major problems. Yeah. And the biggest problem is the fact that we can't talk about it. I mean, we can talk about it on our little YouTube channels and so on, but the BBC the BBC's responsibility is to hold these kinds of debates. It is a huge change that they are suggesting we just accept without talking about it, and it's outrageous.
It's frightening. It's frightening.
It is.
Well, you know, it is frightening, because if this is the new world, I mean, it is very, very worrying.
Yeah. So so let's try and do whatever we can to put as much pressure on them as possible. You know, we just want to talk about it. You know.
Yeah.
All right, brilliant, lovely to see you guys. Always a delight. You know, Rebecca is available, who was in the Labour Party thing. So perhaps we can. I was thinking that maybe we'll bring her in on a weekend mess or an extra mess or something.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
She's very funny, so great. I think.
Yes, right, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week, and thanks for all the comments. And
thanks, commenters. Like and subscribe.
See you soon, everyone. Bye.
Okay, bye.